Good morning, good afternoon. I don't know what time you're watching this, but I'm glad to be back with you. It's Brian Johnson again. So I am going to be with you for your PLCs for most of this year. Dr. Keegan and the administration really want to harness the benefits of engaging with diversity. And so this is a first follow-up to my October 12th presentation that I gave to you all. So we're going to be having several PLCs for the rest of the year, or professional development days for the rest of the year, engaging with these issues. So I thought, as a first follow-up to my Monday discussion, to give you some tips, some things that I've learned. I've been a diversity educator for over 20 years. And so this is, today I'm going to share with you some generalized tips that I've learned teaching and talking about diversity. And I've been doing this a long time in schools and across the country. So the first thing I want to share with you, the number one strategy that I would recommend, that when you're talking about diversity, you should not be surprised that there are a diversity of opinions about diversity. And additionally, so the first strategy that I would tell you is to create a common lexicon. So you should define for your students and for your colleagues what term you're using, or to give them language to really talk about whatever the issue. One of the frustrations that people have when engaging with diversity is they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. So you have to give them a level of fluency to be able to engage. So I'm really big on defining terms. So your definition of, let's say, racism may be very different than mine. And so by creating a common lexicon that you're working from, you do a better job with sort of creating that community, that learning community. So be sure to give people the words, the language, the words to talk intelligently, fluently about this kind of stuff. So that's number one. People get nervous with engaging with these topics. So one of a second tip that I would share with you is talk about the systemic nature of oppression. During this summer, during all the melee of the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, there was a lot of talk, I would call it backlash, on the topic of systemic racism. Because in our heads, the way we have been socialized, we think racism is only the people wearing the tall white hoods and the masks. But there are many more ways where racism manifests itself in our society. So it's important to engage with the fact that inequality is hardwired into our sociological society. So we need to understand that we're talking about human rights. We're talking about civil rights. And so the more people understand the systemic nature of these things, we love to believe the American lie, that everybody has the same inalienable rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, I'm sorry, that's not quite all the time true. That's an espoused value, which is really nice and honorable, but we have not achieved that everybody has the same equal rights yet. So we have to understand that we have in our minds the way that we have historicized racism, let's say, or inequality, as we point to the particular bad acts of several individuals throughout our history. And so because we're not seeing those things anymore, we don't see cross burnings, we don't see lynchings, that doesn't mean that they're not happening, we just haven't seen them. They happen. And so we have this false assumption that things are so much better now because we're not seeing it so frequently. The problem is it's still happening. There are numerous ways we see oppression realized in our society. Racism, classism, all the negative isms, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, all those are manifestations, and they show up in various different ways in education, employment, and housing. So in a lot of ways, we can I think we do ourselves a disservice by just believing that it's so much better now. We think, this is what when I tell my students, just because Justin Timberlake is on the R&B charts, or because Usher is on the pop charts, does not mean that we have made it. And so we need to understand and be conscious of the fact that the dynamics of each of those areas of manifestation differ, and they affect us differently. People tell me, why do I focus on difference so much? Difference is a powerful way that we see discrimination and we see prejudice in our area. And so I focus or highlight issues of difference because it's important. It's important that we engage with the fact that we don't have a level playing field. We can pretend, thinking that I have this discussion regularly in my classes. I'm teaching a sociology course this semester where people believe America is a meritocracy. So the idea that so we were talking about the American dream and who gets it, or how do you get it? And the students constantly respond. There are several responses. You get it through hard work. Whatever this American dream is, if you just make up in your mind to work hard, then you can get it. Well, friend, guess what? Hard work is not just it. It's not only what you do, but it's also who you know, where you're at. People are amazed to hear that when I graduated with a master's degree, this is nearly 30 years ago, I actually was delivering pizzas. That was my job. Now, granted, I loved it. It was because I worked for, this was the big Domino's, get your pizza delivered in 30 minutes or less, or it's free. So there's a lot of competition between the drivers. Plus, you get there faster, you get a nice tip. So I like the competition related to driving and getting the pizza to the people. I really did enjoy that job, but I had a master's degree and I was delivering pizzas. So I sort of felt weird about that because I felt like I should be doing more, making more. But that was the small town that I grew up in, where I was living. So opportunity just does not afford itself to all people. And so we have to be aware that people get used to being ignored. One of the most frustrating things of the backlash that happened related to George Floyd is people are on the streets crying and screaming, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. And I totally get that. And we point to the rioting and the looting as people say, oh yeah, I can get with that, Black Lives Matter. But they lash out towards the rioting and looting. Rioting and looting are mechanisms of feeling voiceless. So people feel like they're being ignored, like people are not hearing them. And so they react out of that pain. They yell louder. They want to be heard. They want to be noticed. So one of the strategies that as an educator you should be aware of, that when somebody's yelling at you, they're not really yelling at you personally. They're yelling out of frustration because they don't know what else to do. Because we have not been taught the coping skills for this stuff, because we pretend that all the suppression stuff is false, and it doesn't happen because we don't see it. But if I'm telling you my perspective, this is that I see this happening, or this is causing me pain. Hear my pain, react to my pain, not to my manifestation. Because what begins to happen is we try to heal the symptoms rather than the actual problem. A second strategy that I would tell you is that you want to focus on issues and principles rather than identity politics. What I'm saying is, instead of playing my group versus your group, instead of saying this is a black thing you would understand. That was a big thing when I first started teaching. And I actually used to wear those t-shirts. That was because when hip hop first came to the cultural forefront, it was once called black music. And so black people like me, I did mention I was black, right? You saw that. Would put on this t-shirt and say, hey, it's a black thing. We actually said it's a black thing. It's a black thing you would understand. And so I would walk up to white people and say, read the shirt. And of course, they're like, what are you talking about? And so as I matured, as I grew, I began to understand that I was perhaps intentionally, I think it was unintentional, but it was intentional, pushing people away, saying, you'll never understand me, so get out of here. And so we don't have to be black to understand race and racism. You can be white and be aware of yourself and be aware of how you live a race life. So you don't necessarily have to be an expert in racial issues to talk about race. You just have to be aware of culturally how you live in this world. So you may not wear the skin color, but you live race. If you don't have to think about race a lot, that's you living whiteness. And so I would suggest you learn all you can about what does it mean for you to be white. And what does whiteness mean to you? What does it mean for you to check the white box? Because in this society, we have privileged whiteness as the end all be all. For years, white has been the finish line in issues of beauty, government, education. So there is a barrier. Did you know that not all white people have always been white? So for a number of years in this country, at the founding of this country, those who were Irish, those who were Scottish, those who were Jewish, they were not white. As a matter of fact, many Jews, when they came to this country, were called the N-word. And so it took a number of years, but once we started to codify race into law, we found that those Jews that they were referring to as the N-word, as a negative racial epithet, once they began to codify race in this country, it was skin color that made the difference. Because we realized that those people we were identifying as Jews or the N-word, they shared with something skin color commonality with those who were in the white majority. And so whiteness became this thing, this commercialized manner of success. And we codified that into law. And so understanding issues of diversity is not, you don't have to be black. You just have to be aware of how you operate in this world yourself. I point that out because one of the things that happens routinely is that when we talk about race, let's say, in America, we have a tendency to focus on brown people. We forget that white people are raced. And so when we're talking, I said this on Monday, that when we're typically when we're talking about Black history, that's our history. It's not just the history of or for Black people. It's your history too. It's Black American history. So if you identify as an American, this is your history too. And so doing that requires us to get away from what I call the oppression Olympics. So what we typically do is minority groups of whatever persuasion get into this battle where they each argue that their group has had it worse. Black people will say, oh, about the 400 years, the horrors of slavery. Then the Jews will say Holocaust. The gay people will say, hey, for years I couldn't get married. And then now, of course, with the arguments over who's going to be on the Supreme Court, there's a question of where will the equal marriage amendment be stricken down. And so people are concerned about their potential relationships. That affects all of us. This is our America. And so understanding these various issues help us to understand why so many people are hurting in our culture, in our society. And so let's not get bogged down by the oppression Olympics. Let's get bogged down with how do we make this right. But I can talk about all the negative issues all day. But what we need to learn is how to get beyond just the simple surface issues. You may have heard of the term the cultural iceberg. There are things that are sort of on the surface or above the surface. This is what we call surface culture. There are things that are beneath that build our cosmology, our worldview. You've probably heard of the Titanic. And the Titanic went down because it hit an iceberg. And a lot of people think that the ship ran into the top of the iceberg that we typically see that comes out of the water. But what's underneath the surface is a huge block of ice. And so it's what's underneath the surface that weighs more heavily and is in many ways more important. So you can talk about, let's say, Black people like soul food. So we like a lot of root vegetables, and we eat things like chitterlings and collard greens and all, etc. It's, a lot of Southern food. And there's a reason for all that. There's a reason why people eat pig intestines. That's what chitlins are. And that comes from making the best of the worst. So masters who own the enslaved would give their enslaved workers the scraps of the meat that when they would slaughter a pig, what was left went to the enslaved people. So we learned how to make do with the scraps and the stuff that nobody wants to eat. So who wants pig intestines? I'll be honest with you, I eat them and I like them. Of course, I don't eat everybody's chitlins, but that's a whole other thing. So understand there's more to the reasons, there's more to the rationale. So under the surface, why do you believe what you believe? Why do you think that you do what you do? And do you have an answer? Be thoughtful about how you show up in the world, what you bring to our society. A fourth strategy that I want to share with you, and this is one that I have found the most important of all the ones that I've been teaching. You want to include the majority perspective, whatever that might be. So if you want to talk about Black people, you want to talk about race, engage with what whiteness is first. If you want to talk about sexual orientation, engage with what is heterosexuality, because that is so normalized in our culture that we forget or we let those things go out of our mindset. So you want to always include. That is the message of the day, include. So one of the ways that white people like to shut down the conversation about diversity is this isn't about me, so why are we talking about this? Why are they? And they point outward. Why are they so hypersensitive? Why are they? So it becomes about someone else. This is why I'm saying this is about all of us together. The more you understand that, the greater the likelihood that you will see more success. So make sure that you always make sure that whoever is the person or persons in the majority of whatever you're talking about is included in the conversation. Their perspective needs to be in the center of the conversation. So whenever I talk about whatever issues, if I talk about race, I talk about white people first. If I talk about gender and sex, I talk about men first. Excuse me. If I talk about sexual orientation, I talk about heterosexuality first, because I don't want those who are in the majority to feel like they're being left out. So include what that perspective is, so that brings them into the conversation. Strategy number 5. Value open and respectful dialogue. My mom will always say it this way: you can say anything you want, but just remember who you're talking to. So, which was code for this is a lie, because I couldn't say what I wanted to, because there were punishments to what I said. But understand that there is a power differential in that is written in our dialogue. And so we want you to know, as the head of the classroom, that you have to value the knowledge that students bring to your issues, whatever they might be, and honor those. And we don't want, you heard me say on Monday, we don't want to, I think I said this, if not, I meant to say it. As we're engaging with these issues, we want you to know that there's no punishment. We're not searching for who gets this wrong. We're searching for people to get this right. But understand that as a minority person, I'm conscious of the fact that the system is not wired for me. And so when I scream Black Lives Matter, I'm saying that I have been ignored, or I or my people have been ignored and have been left out of the system that is at play. And so I'm screaming from that level of pain, and that I want to be heard. So what we want to teach our students is how to ask questions, because getting to that deeper level of conversation requires us to ask better questions. You know, as a teacher, that we grading is one of the frustrations of our teaching life. And so I don't know about you, but I know I try to mitigate some of the pain of grading by making my grading easier. My tests are all multiple choice. So that becomes what I just take my answer key and just put it next to the paper, A, B, C, and I can check it really fast. And so I sit with, when I ask students to write papers, I sit with the papers, and my wife and kids will tell you, there are times when I get so frustrated by what students are saying that I'll just throw their paper, and I get angry. So I want to go back to the ease. And so, but if you really want, as a teacher, to get the best out of what your students are learning, you need to learn to ask the right questions. Value open dialogue. And then strategy number 6 is ask better questions. We're trying to get to the complexities of diversity, complexities of identity. So it's more than just skin color. Matter of fact, race is more than skin color. And how I feel about my race is a very different animal called racial identity. And so sometimes that racial identity gets confusing because we don't talk about it enough, because we're so used to just thinking that this person has black skin, and then you begin to run down all the stereotypes that you think you know about that group. And by the way, if I didn't say it before, well, I think it's important for me to say here. Just because you stereotype does not make you a bad person. We all do it, because there is information has been hardwired into who we are through our media, through our government, through our education, through our religion. And so we all have the potential to be prejudiced. And prejudice is simply when I presume to know enough information or sufficient information about a group or an individual based upon their group identity. And we all do that. Every single one of us, including me. So we all have prejudices, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, we are products of prior learning. And so that prior learning makes some of this stuff much more difficult, because most of us have been raised to believe that the way that we see the world is the right way. And so what that is ethnocentrism. The belief that my language, my people, my religion, my. Hear the personal in that, my country. And there's nothing wrong with that for feeling proud of who you are, but it makes it complex when you begin to understand how my complexity gets sort of like this. And so we want to unfold our fingers a little bit to help people understand that we need to get here. So learn to ask the right questions. I'm going to provide Jana with, or Dr. Keegan, with a list of definitions that I believe are really important to understand about diversity issues. And you'll see that what I really love about these definitions is the fact that they acknowledge the systemic nature of inequality and oppression that is present in our world today. So I will let you read that or study that. When we come back, I'm going to switch gears a little bit to talk about one of the tools and strategies that I find very powerful, and that's how we manage and harness the benefits of using film in our classrooms. And it's something I've been doing for over 20 years. No matter what subject I'm teaching, I'm using some type of film. So when we come back, so you take a quick break, however long you need to, and then we come back, we're going to start talking about film.